My father used to drive long-haul trucks across Canada, and one night, on a completely empty stretch of highway, he picked up a man who said he just needed a ride home. At first, everything felt normal, until the man asked him to take a turn on a road my father knew didn't exist. No lights, no houses, nothing. But when he followed those directions anyway, he saw something that shouldn't have been there. A massive mansion standing in the middle of nowhere. And the moment he stepped inside that house, something started to feel wrong. What he saw, what he heard, and what followed after that was so terrifying that after that night, my father never drove a truck again. My father came to Canada sometime around the 1960s. And after arriving, he worked all kinds of jobs in different places, trying to build a life in a country that was completely new to him. He was still young back then, and because of that, he had a bit of a carefree attitude. The kind of mindset where you don't really think too much about danger or consequences. This incident took place during a time when he was working as a truck driver. Not just any driver, but a long-haul one. Someone who spent most of his time on the road, traveling across long distances, sometimes from one province to another, and sometimes even driving from Canada into the United States. On this particular trip, he was driving a large cargo truck from Mississauga, Ontario, all the way to Winnipeg, Manitoba. A journey that covered roughly 2,200 kilometers, a long and exhausting route that required hours of continuous driving. Back then, things were very different. There was no GPS, no Google Maps, no navigation apps to guide drivers. They had to rely completely on road signs, their memory, and their own experience to find their way. My father had a habit, something he never skipped before starting any trip. Whenever he set out on a journey, he would always perform a short prayer, and he would light incense inside the truck. It was his way of feeling protected during the drive. And just like every other time, that day he followed the same routine. Finished his prayer, lit the incense, and started his journey. After driving for about 500 kilometers, he began to feel the need for a short break. He also needed to refuel the truck. By then, it was already late at night, somewhere between 10 p.m. and midnight, the kind of time when the highway becomes quiet and everything around you starts to feel emptier than usual. Some of the highway gas stations back then even had basic facilities where drivers could freshen up or take a quick shower. So my father thought it would be a good idea to stop there, refuel, clean up a bit, and then continue driving. His plan was to push another 600 kilometers after that, and then take a proper rest somewhere safer, maybe even get a short nap before continuing again. There's something important about that route. On the highway from Ontario to Manitoba, there's a stretch of road that runs for nearly 300 kilometers, and throughout that entire distance, there are no gas stations. No hotels, no houses, not even a small settlement. Just an empty road surrounded by darkness. And because of that, people started calling that place the Dead Zone. So after my father finished everything at the gas station and was about to get back into his truck, just as he was about to continue the journey, a middle-aged white man suddenly approached him. The man's appearance immediately stood out. He was wearing expensive brand-name jeans, a high-quality leather jacket, and a well-known brand watch. Everything about him looked polished, almost too polished for a place like that. He introduced himself as Jones, and then asked my father for a ride. He said his home was about 200 kilometers away from there, and that the person who was supposed to pick him up had just canceled at the last moment. It was already late at night, and at that hour, finding another ride on that road was almost impossible. He insisted that he had to get home that same night. At first, my father refused. He didn't feel comfortable picking up a stranger in the middle of the night, especially on a route like that. But then Jones offered him $100. After thinking about it for a moment, my father finally agreed and told him to get inside the truck. But just as Jones was about to step in, he made a strange request. He asked my father to put out the incense inside the truck. And not just that, he insisted that all of it be thrown away, saying that he was allergic to the smell. At first, my father didn't agree, because lighting incense before a trip was something he always did. It was part of his routine, something he believed kept him safe. But Jones kept insisting, again and again. Until eventually, my father gave in and threw them all away. After that, Jones got into the truck, and they started the journey again. My father tried to make conversation while driving, but Jones barely responded, only answering with short replies. Yes or no. Nothing more. And after a while, my father stopped trying. The silence inside the truck becoming heavier, more uncomfortable with every passing minute. Outside, it was completely dark. The kind of darkness where nothing exists beyond the reach of the headlights. The road ahead, visible only as a thin strip of light cutting through the night. My father was driving on one side, focused on the road, while Jones sat beside him, completely still, staring forward, saying nothing. And slowly, that silence started to feel wrong. Then suddenly, Jones spoke. He said that after about 10 kilometers, my father would need to take a right turn. Since my father had driven that route many times before, he knew very well that there were no houses anywhere along that road, so naturally, he questioned Jones about it. But the moment he did, Jones snapped back at him in a sharp, almost aggressive tone, telling him, "Just do what I say," and nothing more. And at that point, the truck was moving at around 110 kilometers per hour, yet my father chose to stay calm, keeping his head cool and continuing to drive in silence without arguing. After about 10 kilometers, he took the right turn as instructed, and they drove a short distance after that. And then suddenly, my father saw something that made him slow down for a moment. A massive mansion standing there in the middle of nowhere, completely out of place, and he couldn't understand how something that large could have gone unnoticed all this time, despite the fact that he had driven that road so many times before. That's when Jones spoke again, this time in a calm voice, telling him that it was his mother's house, that he lived there with his mother and his sister, and that it was his sister's birthday that night, which was why he needed to get there no matter what. And then he invited my father inside, saying that they were about to cut the birthday cake, and that he should come in, eat something, and stay for dinner. And since my father was already feeling hungry, he hesitated only for a brief moment before agreeing. But the moment he stepped inside the house, something immediately felt off, because even though the place had looked clean and well-maintained from the outside, the inside felt completely different. The air heavy and still, almost suffocating, as if something unseen was pressing down on him. And Jones told my father to sit in the living area before heading upstairs to the second floor. My father waited there for a while, expecting someone to come, but no one did. And after some time he called out, a bit louder this time, asking, "Is anyone here?" But there was no response, so he called again, yet still nothing. And eventually he decided to go upstairs himself to see what was going on. When he reached the second floor, he saw 3 rooms, all of them nearly identical, making it impossible to tell which one Jones had entered. So he called out again, "Jones, where are you?" And just then, from inside one of the rooms, a soft female voice floated out, saying, "Come inside." And my father slowly started walking toward the door, raising his hand to knock. But before he could even touch it, the door slowly opened on its own, revealing a dark room inside, with only faint light coming from a window on one side. And standing in front of that window, facing away from him, was a girl.
her hair gently moving in the wind coming through the open window.
My father felt as if he had fallen into some kind of trance, like something was pulling his mind away from him, and no words would come out of his mouth as he stood there completely still, staring without blinking, unable to move or react. And at that point, he was still standing near the doorway. He hadn't even stepped inside the room yet, when once again that voice floated toward him, softly calling out, "Come inside." But this time, the voice sounded different. Gentle, almost familiar, like something he had known for years. Something comforting enough to make him take a step forward without thinking. And just as he was about to enter the room, something suddenly snapped inside him. His senses came rushing back all at once. And in that instant, he realized that whatever was happening around him was not normal. Something was terribly wrong. And without wasting even a second, he turned around, determined to get out of that house immediately. But right at that moment, the girl's appearance changed. The soft and calm figure he had been looking at suddenly twisted into something horrifying, something unnatural, and in a single motion, she leaped from near the window and came right in front of him, moving far too fast for anything human. And as she got closer, my father could clearly see her face. Half of it looked burned and disfigured, her skin melted and uneven. There was no hair on her head. Her height was average, but her presence felt overwhelming, and a strong, unbearable stench spread through the air around her. She stopped directly in front of him, and in a thin, distorted, almost broken voice, both sharp and eerie at the same time, she said, "Today is your last day. You are going to die." And then she began to laugh. A sound that didn't feel human at all, something that sent a chill straight through his body. The moment my father saw that, every instinct inside him took over, and using whatever strength he had left, he turned and ran toward the stairs. But as he rushed down, he lost his footing, stumbled, and fell, tumbling down the steps. And behind him, that thing was coming after him, crawling on all fours, moving in a way no human ever could, closing the distance between them rapidly. In that moment of pure fear, something suddenly came to his mind. He remembered that he had something with him, a sacred symbol from his Sikh faith, a small locket that he always kept in his pocket. And without thinking, without hesitation, he pulled it out and began reciting Gurbani, holding on to those words as if they were the only thing protecting him. He kept chanting again and again, not knowing how much time had passed, not knowing how long he had been doing it, until eventually everything went dark and he lost consciousness. When my father finally regained his senses, he found himself surrounded by police and ambulances, and they told him that during a routine patrol, they had noticed a large truck parked by the side of the road. But when they checked inside, no one was there. So they searched the area and eventually found him unconscious inside an abandoned house nearby. After that, my father told them everything that had happened, and the police informed him that people in that area sometimes reported hearing screams coming from that house, but no one had ever actually seen anyone there. And they also said that many years ago, a newly married couple had taken their own lives in that very house, but to this day, no one knows why. After that night, my father never drove a truck again, and he carried the trauma with him for a very long time. And that was the story. My name is David. I live in London, and I've been wanting to share this story for quite some time now. It's something I came across that still feels difficult to explain, so I decided to write it down and share it. The Tower of London is not just a historic fortress. It's a place where hundreds of people were brutally executed, and many believe their souls still wander within its walls. But among all the spirits said to haunt that place, there is one that stands out above the rest. A queen who never found peace. Anne Boleyn. In the year 1536, King Henry VIII ordered her execution, accusing her of betrayal, a charge many believe was never true. On a cold morning inside the dark courtyard of the Tower, Anne Boleyn knelt down, her face strangely calm, as if she had already accepted her fate. And then, in a single strike, the sword came down. Her head was severed and fell into a basket. But what truly terrified those who witnessed it wasn't just the execution itself, it was what happened after. Her eyes were still open, and her lips were moving, as if she was trying to say something, as if she was cursing someone. Just 1 week later, late at night, a guard was patrolling a quiet corridor inside the tower when suddenly the air around him changed. Everything went still, cold, heavy, as if time itself had stopped. A chilling sensation ran down his body, and then from the darkness in one corner of the corridor, a figure slowly began to emerge. Step by step, at first he couldn't understand what he was seeing, but as it moved closer into the faint light, his body froze completely. It was a woman. Her body looked normal, but she had no head, and in her hands she was holding it, her own severed head. The eyes were still open, and the lips were moving in a disturbing way, as if she was trying to speak, as if she was calling someone by name. The guard tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move, as if some invisible force was holding him in place. Then suddenly, from that severed head, a horrifying scream burst out, a scream that sounded like the final cry of a dying woman. The next morning, the guard was found unconscious, his eyes completely empty, his mouth frozen open, and his skin cold like ice. He never spoke again. And even today, people say the story isn't over. Every year on May 19th, the night Anne Boleyn was executed, she returns. Many visitors have claimed to see her walking slowly through the corridors of the tower, holding her own head in her hands. Some say they have heard a woman crying near the walls. Others claim that while standing in front of a mirror at night, their reflections suddenly changed. One tourist once took a photo near a window inside the tower, but when they looked at the image later, their breath stopped, because reflected behind them was the figure of a woman, a body without a head. And that was the story. This story isn't extremely terrifying, but it's one of those childhood memories that never really leaves you. The kind of memory that stays buried somewhere in the back of your mind for years. Yet the moment you think about it again, it takes you right back to being a kid. Back to a time when certain places felt mysterious, unsettling, and far more frightening than they probably really were. There was an old abandoned building out on the heath that everyone simply called the Water House, a crumbling brick structure that once controlled the entire water system for the estate. Even back then, people used to joke that it was a miracle the thing could still pump water at all. The place looked like it should have collapsed decades earlier. It had black slate roofing, rusted iron frames, shattered windows, and by the time this happened, most of the doors were already gone. Generations of local kids had smashed the remaining glass with rocks, leaving the entire building hollow and exposed to the wind. My mother and her siblings grew up around that area, and ever since we were little, they always told us how unsettling the Waterhouse felt. Not just to them, but to everyone who went near it. There was just something wrong about the place. Even during the daytime, it gave off this strange feeling that made your stomach tighten for no reason. This happened during one of the hottest summers I can remember, right in the middle of school vacation. The older boys in the family were home that day for some reason, and the rest of us younger cousins were being loud and annoying as usual, so eventually they decided to take us blackberry picking just to keep us occupied for a few hours. Honestly, none of us complained. Blackberry picking was kind of a family tradition, and our grandmother made the best blackberry pies imaginable. About half an hour later, we all grabbed our little buckets and headed out toward the heath. There were 5 of us younger kids altogether, all excited and running around while the older boys tried to keep us under control. To get there, we had to cross a fence behind my grandmother's house. There was a narrow gap at one end, and because I was still using a wheelchair back then, one of my older cousins carefully lifted me through first, while another carried my chair over the fence before setting me back down again. As we made our way across the heath, the older boys started telling us ghost stories like they always did, partly because they loved scaring us, and partly because we constantly begged them to. And honestly, nobody could tell a story better than my cousins Ryan and Ben. The way they described things always sounded so real that even the older kids listening would start looking over their shoulders by the end of it. But the moment we got close to the water house, the talking stopped completely. Nobody ever spoke near that place, not even the older boys. For something so ordinary on paper, the building always looked unbelievably eerie. And even now, years later, I still remember the way it stood there in silence, like something inside it was watching us pass by. There was another fence we had to cross before reaching the blackberry field, but this time the mood felt different. As we squeezed through the narrow gap in the fence, all of us had gone unusually quiet. Because without even saying it out loud, we were all thinking about the same thing. The old story everyone in the area knew about the water house. According to the local legend, back in the early 1960s, there was a violent gang of bank robbers operating around the area. These weren't ordinary thieves either. They were known for being extremely dangerous. During robberies, they would terrorize both staff and customers before shooting at almost anything that moved. For a while, they kept getting away with it too, until one robbery went horribly wrong. A 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot and killed during the chaos. Several others were badly injured, and one member of the gang died in the gunfire as well. Another one, supposedly the most brutal out of all of them, was left seriously wounded. People say the surviving gang members escaped with barely any money left and disappeared into the heath, hiding inside the water house while the police searched for them. Back then, the building was still fairly new, isolated enough to keep them hidden from everyone else. But something happened inside that place. Nobody ever figured out exactly what. Months later, the bodies of the remaining gang members were discovered inside the water house, rotting where they had been left. And after that, strange stories slowly started spreading around the area. People claimed they heard disturbing noises coming from inside the building late at night. Low, murmuring voices, strange cries, sounds that didn't seem human. Others claimed they had seen large, hairy figures moving silently between the pipes and shadows inside the water house. And almost everyone who passed near the place described the same horrible smell. This damp, rotten stench, like mold and dead river weeds left sitting in water for years. From that point on, the water house developed a reputation that never really went away. By the late 1970s, even darker rumors had started spreading around the heath. Several homeless people who used to sleep out near the area were found dead under strange circumstances not too far from the water house. Officially, nothing was ever connected to the building itself, but locals didn't care much about official explanations. As far as most people around there were concerned, something about the water house simply wasn't right. Over time, people stopped going near it altogether, especially after dark, and eventually the building was left abandoned to slowly rot away. That was the history we all grew up hearing about, and that was exactly why every single one of us wanted to get past the water house as quickly as possible. Once we finally squeezed through the second fence and put a little distance between ourselves and the building, us younger cousins worked up enough courage to glance back at it for a second before the older boys hurried us along again. One of my cousins lifted me back into my wheelchair, and from there we continued toward the blackberry field. Thankfully, once we reached the field, the atmosphere completely changed. A few other local kids we knew were already there, and for the next few hours, everything felt normal again. We spent the afternoon picking blackberries, stuffing handfuls into our mouths, splashing around near the river, and running through the grass while the older boys joked around with each other. Eventually, though, the sun started dropping lower in the sky, and before long it was time to head back home. The walk back started off just like the journey there. Everyone was laughing again, the older boys were teasing us like usual, and for a little while we'd almost forgotten about the water house entirely. But the closer we got to it, the quieter things became. By the time we reached the fence near the building again, the atmosphere felt wrong somehow. heavy and suffocating, almost like the air before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the older boys helped lift me out of my wheelchair, while another carried the chair over the fence. Most of the others had already crossed to the other side, when suddenly one of my cousins stopped moving and stared toward the back of the water house. In a low voice, he said, "Something just moved back there, bruv." At first, the others didn't take him seriously. Out of all the older boys, he was the one most likely to joke around or try to scare everyone for fun. But this time, his face looked completely serious. "I'm gonna check it out," he muttered before squeezing past us and moving toward the side of the building. One of the others immediately tried stopping him. "Wait up, we've got to—" But before he could finish speaking, we heard him scream. Not a playful yell, not someone joking around. A real scream, full of panic and disgust. And instantly, the older boys stumbled backward away from the water house. One of my older cousins had already pulled me out of my wheelchair again, when suddenly he shouted only one word. "Run!" And all of us did. Everything happened so fast after that. One of the boys grabbed my wheelchair, folded it up while running, another snatched the younger kids by their hands, and one of my cousins threw me over his shoulders before sprinting across the heath as fast as he could. Nobody even questioned it. The panic in their voices alone was enough to terrify all of us younger kids instantly. As we ran, one of the boys kept shouting over and over again, "Don't look back! Don't look back!" But of course, I did, and somehow, I saw nothing. No figure, no movement, nothing at all behind us except the dark outline of the water house sitting silently in the distance. We didn't stop running until we finally reached the fence that led back toward the road near the estate. The moment we could see streetlights and houses again, it honestly felt like we had escaped something horrible. By then, we were completely exhausted, especially the older boys who were breathing so hard they could barely talk. Before climbing through the fence, one of them leaned against the railing trying to catch his breath before finally asking in a shaky voice, "What the hell did you see?" For a second, nobody answered. Then quietly, almost stuttering from fear, my cousin replied, "Yellow eyes, a hairy face." The moment he said it, all of us younger kids completely lost it. Some of us started crying, others started screaming, and one of the older boys had to calm everyone down while repeatedly telling us we were safe now, that whatever it was couldn't follow us back. But none of us believed him completely. All we wanted was to get as far away from the water house as possible. When we finally got back home, we must have looked absolutely terrible because our mothers immediately noticed something was wrong. We were pale, shaking, covered in dirt, and unusually quiet. They asked the older boys what had happened, but after a brief pause, one of them simply laughed nervously and said we'd gotten scared by some drunk old man hiding in the bushes looking for lost golf balls. Apparently, that wasn't too uncommon around the heath back then, so the adults accepted the explanation pretty quickly. They hugged us, tried calming us down, and told us there was nothing to worry about. But the truth is, none of us ever told them what my cousin actually saw near the water house that evening. And to this day, I still don't know what was hiding back there in the dark. All I know is that after that night, none of us younger kids ever went anywhere near the water house again.